Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and I've got a lot to cover in this one. This one talks about infinity gems and vampires and just all sorts of stuff. But before we get into it, smash that like button, check to see if you're still subscribed, and as always, leave us a comment. That helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, but also we love hearing from you guys. We have an awesome community here, and it's all thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, the era of the game that I am the most nostalgic for are the games that we did when I was in high school. My two best friends at the time were Jay and Ryan. And Jay played a character named Shadowstorm, and Ryan played a character named Torch. And I was so nostalgic for that era, not only of the game, but that era of my life, right? That in the late 90s, when I bought the local comic book store, I renamed it Continuum Comics and Games. And it was after that team from our game. And that was about 4 years after I graduated from high school, because I had done the art school thing, so on and so forth. And then Ryan had gone to OSU. His time there was up, and he moved home to our hometown for a little while. There was this period of time there between him graduating from college and then him getting married and having kids and buying a house and so on and so forth. So in that little brief interim period of a couple of years, he was around all the time again, right? And Jay had gone into the army, which I don't think he liked very much. He didn't seem very interested at all in re-enlisting. And so then he was around. And I've met so many people over the years that will talk about like their glory days or the good old days or whatever you want to call it. And they'll say stuff like, man, what I wouldn't give to have one more day of like hanging out in high school with that group of friends and, so on and so forth. And so the awesome thing is, I felt that way. When I was in college, I missed those guys. I missed those times. And then it sort of came back. And for this just little brief period there, it was almost like we got another year of high school together or something. But in like the best possible way. So we were, going to Taco Bell all the time, and we were just sitting around drinking beer and laughing together and just so on and so forth. And it was awesome. And so, we got the band back together, so to speak, and we wanted to play the game together. But the problem was that while they had been away, and mind you, they would come home for Christmas or something like that, and I would run a game for one or the other, but not both at once, ever. But at any rate, while they had been away, they weren't getting any experience points. Their characters weren't getting any stronger. So they were behind, right? And they wanted to play and be on the same team with the John Redbridge character, but they didn't want to be like his sidekicks or something. You know what I mean? They didn't want to live in his shadow. They wanted to be equals. And so I had to figure out how to make that happen. And I've mentioned before on the podcast, I am just a huge fan of the original 1980s Transformers cartoon. Right now, as I'm recording this, I'm sitting in my room and I am surrounded by just shelves of Transformers. It is a big deal for me. And back in the 80s, they made an animated movie that takes place between seasons 2 and 3 of the cartoon. And in that movie, Megatron becomes upgraded into this other character called Galvatron. And likewise, there's a character named Hot Rod, and he gets this massive upgrade into a character named Rodimus Prime, who's way more powerful than Hot Rod was. And, there's other examples of that in Transformers too, like Bumblebee became a character called Goldbug, for instance, so on and so forth. But my point is that I was used to that idea of taking a character and then they undergo some kind of a change, no pun intended, and they are more powerful after it's over, right? And so I decided to do that to Jay and Ryan's characters, Torch and Shadowstorm. But the question was kind of like, how, right? And if you look at the character of Hot Rod, the thing that does it to him is this object called the Matrix. And without getting too into it, in my humble opinion, what the Matrix really is it is a sort of spherical blue crystal full of energy of some sort, right? And then it has a kind of a vessel around it that you would use to like carry it around and stuff like that. Like it's got handles and stuff. If you forget about that other stuff, I feel like what's really at the heart of it is this crystal. And so I started to think along those lines. And I came up with the idea, and I didn't mean to. I accidentally ripped off Disney's Aladdin because I called this place the Cave of Wonders, and I totally forgot that that was taken already. But I came up with this idea that there was this cave on top of a mountain, someplace really, really remote. And just like the absolute middle of nowhere. And inside of this cave, these crystals were growing out of the walls and the floor and the ceiling and, just so on and so forth. And each crystal was basically a ripoff of one of the Infinity Gems. And yeah, I know Marvel calls them the Infinity Stones now, but I'm an old man. Back in my day, we called them Infinity Gems. But whereas the Infinity Gems were sort of, to me, it always looked like they were kind of egg shaped, like if you cut an egg long ways. You know what I mean? These would be more kind of like in the old Christopher Reeve Superman movie. He has this like glowing green crystal and he like throws it. He like hikes to the North Pole and he like throws it. And when it goes in the water, it almost acts like a seed and it grows, the Fortress of Solitude. So I was thinking more like those crystals where they're like really long, but you get the gist. So I came up with a ripoff of the time jump, that one of these cosmic crystals then would be associated with sort of the domain of time and time powers. So since Torch had super speed, we had him pick one of these crystals, pull it out of its place where it had grown from, and he absorbs the energy out of the crystal and it turns gray and gets cracks in it because it's all used up now. And by the way, that was still me using Transformers the movie as my inspiration, because when Optimus Prime and Megatron have their big fight to the finish, right? Megatron gets all these cracks in him. He doesn't get dents like if you kicked a car door or something like that, right? He has cracks as though he's crystalline, which I always thought was really interesting. And then when Optimus Prime dies, he turns gray. And so I was using those visuals. It's kind of a visual language. So I was putting those visuals into these crystals when they're used up. And then we gave the space gem equivalent, that is, to Shadowstorm because he had teleportation. So we thought that the space crystal would have dealt with anything and everything involving space and spatial relationships and stuff like that. So then he had powers like teleportation and warp and so on and so forth. But then I didn't stop there. I came up with stuff that they don't have infinity gems for at all. So I had one for fire. And then we gave that to Torch, of course. And then, so now he had flame project, flame being, animate flame, control flame, just so on and so forth, right? Anything at all involving fire. And then we did the same thing with electricity. And by the way, I started to have more and more house rules. And we were pulling ideas out of GURP Supers. So GURP Supers, for instance, has more electricity-based powers than DC Heroes does. And since I was giving these characters such a massive upgrade that they did not have the points for, right? Then I wasn't giving them any more hero points after that. I was saying, you guys are done. So I didn't have to worry about character advancement. And I could just slap a power on their sheet and not really worry too much about how it would work in DC Heroes. So some of those other electrical abilities, they would be at like 30 APs or something like that. And that told me everything I needed to know. I didn't need to worry about power cost and how would we make this power get stronger? What were the numbers behind the power? I just didn't worry about any of that at all. Likewise, we ended up giving the upgraded version of Torch was Pulsar. I can't remember if I said that already or not. The upgraded version of Shadowstorm was Umbra. But the upgraded version of Torch was Pulsar. And we wanted them to go out and have these cosmic adventures in space. And so one of the problems there was, how does the guy with super speed run in space? So we took an advantage from GURPS called matter surfing. And that's like what they give Iceman when he has the ice slides that he gets around on. So we just allowed him to have that advantage in DC. And we specified that it represents fire. So then the idea is he could run through the sky. And then when he would run, he would leave trails of fire behind him like the DeLorean from Back to the Future. But you get the gist, right? That was the Cave of Wonders. And it had these cosmic crystals. And when I ran that first adventure for those guys, we didn't even play out the part where they got the crystals. We just talked about it out of game. It was more like we went to Taco Bell and we were sitting around at a table or something. And I'm like, here's my idea. And the other guys are like, cool, yeah, done. And like, that was it. And so when we actually went back to my place and sat down to play, then it was the first moment of that game was these guys were in a spaceship. And I'd made this bad guy that was like a amalgam of Darkseid and Thanos. And they were going to go have to deal with him. But like, we didn't even play out the cave part, right? And it was a means to an end. So it was me just saying, yeah, these guys need an upgrade. We did it. Moving on, and we never talked about it again, right? And then, sort of a similar vein, in 2011, Wizards of the Coast came out with what was at the time the newest version of Gamma World. I want to say it was 7th edition. And the origin story that they give Gamma World is called The Big Mistake. And they say that what happened involves CERN and that for some reason the multiverse collapsed down so that infinite Earths, when the dust settled, there was only one Earth. And so what they imply there is like, let's say that in the multiverse, there are an infinite number of me, right? So there you've got me, and then I have an infinite number of variants, to use the jargon from the Loki TV show. So imagine if I am the one who gets to survive, because it's not the case where me and all my counterparts merge into one amalgam kind of guy, right? That is not what's going on. It is that one of us gets to survive and none of the others do, right? So the way the game presents the big mistake, whether they realized this or not, is they are suggesting an infinite loss of life on a multiversal scale, right? I know it sounds weird. You want to say infinity minus one or something like that when you have one guy survives. But the guys who died were, it's infinite Earth. So it would be an infinite number of people died there. So we borrowed a page from GURPS where they got a group called the Cabal. And the GURPS books say they are comprised of demons and fallen angels and vampires and mummies and, whatever, ghosts and whatever, right? Just supernatural stuff. And when they're mentioning a lot of the races or whatever you want to call it that are members of the Cabal, they're listing like evil stuff, like demons and things like that, right? So we treated the Cabal as villains then. And we came up with the idea that they were the guys behind the big mistake. And that then we needed motive. And so for that, we ripped off something from Rifts, which is yet another role-playing game. And in Rifts, they have this idea called PPE, or potential psychic energy. And depending on who you talk to, when it comes to Rifts players, there's a lot of guys that think that what PPE really is the soul. Because what happens is when a person passes away, that PPE is released. And then there are villains in the Rifts setting that are like powerful wizards and sorcerers and crap like that. And they can use that energy as fuel for their power, right? So we then were like, well, holy crap, like imagine if the big mistake takes out an infinite number of people, that would generate an infinite number of PPE. So then the Cabal would want to absorb that and be godlike, just have infinite power because it's infinite energy, right? And since they're all magical beings and stuff like that, we thought, yeah, that's exactly how PPE works. So it made perfect sense to us, and we ran it. And the good guys won, the bad guys lost. Gamma World did not come to pass in our role-playing game, of course. And it was another example, though, of we'd come up with these villains. They seemed like a really big deal, and then we didn't do anything with them. We just kind of forgot that the Cabal existed. And my son hates that. He's grown up listening to the game. He is a fan of it, right? And he wants to know. He has all these questions. He wants to have answers to all of his questions. And so it drives him crazy when he's like, well, whatever happened to the Cabal? And I'll be like, I don't know. To me, I'm not telling a Cabal story right now. So I just kind of don't care on my end. That is not how he's wired, though. He hates that. And, he wants to know, well, what about the cave? And you said the crystals grow in the cave. And I said, yeah. And he's like, so they regrow? So if you go in and you can like pick the infinity gem, it's like the power gem from Marvel, right? Which is, I think, the one they gave Drax. And then Drax had like infinite strength at one point. Like we gave that one to John Redbridge once upon a time. He's like, so wait, but like it grows more of those? Like someone else could go in there? And he started talking about because it's in the Middle East. And he's like, think of all the fighting and stuff in the Middle East. And there's all sorts of different people with all sorts of different, I don't know if motivation is the right word or what, but for sure there's some bad guys, right? And he's like, imagine those guys just wandering into this cave and they can get the gem of fire or whatever, the fire crystal. And now they literally can just shoot nuclear levels of fire out of their hands at their enemies, right? He's like, that's a huge problem. You should probably address that. So that's what this game was all about. It was about addressing that and taking all these things that had been in old games and then combining them all into a single adventure. So we introduced this girl named Kari Harmon, and she's never been in the game before. She was a brand new character. She's the one that's supposed to be pictured here in the channel art for this one. So Kari goes on a date with John Redbridge. Oh, and I need to explain John Redbridge. This adventure is horrible for how much explanation is required. For the players, they get it, right? They know the history of the game really well. For a lot of listeners, I think would not know all of this. But so the world went into quarantine, of course. And I mentioned before, I was in the hospital and the doctors told me I would not make it. And so I had gotten my affairs in order in the game. And I got rid of my character. And the thinking behind that was that my family was going to be sad if they had to address that. And my hope was that they were going to keep playing after I was gone. That, other people were the game master before I was, and I would hope that other people would be the game master after I'm long gone. Well, then turns out I'm really bad at dying. And I made it. And we're like, well, crap, I off my character for nothing. So I don't want to say we brought him back. We brought a different version of him back, right? Because the one who died, we had said he was in heaven because there was a DC comic book with Green Arrow went to heaven when he died. There's a Marvel comic where Ben Grimm went to heaven for a while. So, I mean, this is a thing, right? This is absolutely a thing that would happen in a Marvel or DC universe. So we said that my guy was in heaven. And we've never taken his soul out of heaven, by the way. It is still there. So he is still dead in that sense. I don't want anybody to think that I lied. No, he's still there. And I try to make people feel a little better because there for a while on DC Comics, there's this character named Zoriel, who was an angel, who was a member of the Justice League. He kind of filled in for Hawkman for a while. He's a creation of a guy named Grant Morrison. And I want to say it was the late 90s. Zoriel had this embassy to heaven in Los Angeles, which I think was an angel pun that they chose Los Angeles. And then the idea was like, for instance, in real life, my mom passed away of cancer when I was very young. I miss my mom. I would love to be able to go visit my mom. Well, in DC Comics, apparently I could. I could just go to the embassy place, right? And Zoriel would like take me there for a day and let me visit loved ones. And I've said before, I think that was a really bad idea. I don't think they ever should have made that comic book. I disagree with a lot of what Grant Morrison does. And he said he does drugs and then writes comic books. And I think you get stories like that one. But the point is, I mean, it was continuity. So we used it. We said that the characters would go visit the soul of John Redbridge in heaven, right? But they still missed him. That wasn't enough. They wanted him running around in a mortal coil. So the solution to it, we kind of were doing what the comics call tryouts. So, for instance, before they made the character of Supergirl, there was a Supergirl tryout, and that was like Jimmy Olsen found a genie's lamp or something dumb, and he like wished there was a Supergirl. And so there was something DC did to kind of test the water, and then they undo it, and then they sort of sit back and see how the fans felt about it. And depending on that, then they decide whether or not they want to move forward with like the real version of the thing. So we had kind of done some tryout-ish stuff with different takes on how we might bring them back or whatever. And so part of it was cloning. We did create a couple of clones of them. We used the idea from GURPS called a brain tape, which is you can download the memories of the person into a machine, and then that same machine can be used to put those memories into a clone. So we had a brain tape of John Redbridge from the end of his life, and we did put it into a clone, but the players didn't like that. It felt not real enough, I guess is what you might say. So what we had done instead was they go back in time and they took a character with them. We've introduced this race of characters. Some of them are half black and half white. What I mean by that is they're split down the middle. And one half of them is like the color of snow, and the other half of them is the color of night, right? So that's what I mean when I say they're half black and half white. And then other members of the race are just 100% gray, right? And then there's variations on those themes, but the idea is that if they touch a character, they can cause that character to split into two characters. And generally speaking, the ones who are black and white will make one of these new characters is like lawful good, and the other one will be like chaotic evil. So you get a very heroic version of the guy that you started with, and a very villainous kind of an evil twin to that guy. So we've used that in games, but then in this case, it was the members of the race that are all gray. They will just make two people where it has no bearing on how good or evil they are at all. They're just exactly like the person originally was. So that was what they did to John Redbridge. They went back to when he was young. They made two of them, and one of them went on to live the life we knew of, and that's the guy who's in heaven, right? It's the guy that they recorded his memories. The other one is our current John Redbridge. He's a young guy who had, at that point in his life, never really done anything wrong yet, which is important to this adventure. And they gave him the memories of the other one, but that doesn't mean those were the choices he made. It doesn't mean he's guilty of the things that other one would be guilty of and stuff like that, right? So they really are two different guys. And that confuses people, but they are. That, for instance, well, I could break that down more. Hopefully you guys just get that, and I don't need to explain that anymore. If I'm wrong, if you want me to explain more, let me know in the comment section, and I will. I'll try to do a better job. Okay, so having said all that, so the current John Redbridge, then we're talking about this adventure, is the young John Redbridge who has been artificially given the memories of the old John Redbridge. Okay, so and by the way, the final thought of the old one before he died was regret. And his last words was he apologized to everybody that he had not been a better man. And so that has had a big effect on the other one. And the other one is trying to be a better man right now. And so this girl shows up, Kari Harmon. And she tries to seduce him. And yeah, I'm just going to kind of put all my cards on the table. This was sort of a big reveal in the game, but I'm just not going to do it that way with the video. So you find out that one of the guys in the Cabal is a vampire who used mesmerism on her. He's hypnotized her in much the same way that Dracula did that to Mina Harker in Bram Stoker's Dracula, right? The novel, I mean, not the old movie. But at any rate, same thing. In fact, Kari Harmon is an anagram for Mina Harker. So, point being, they go on a date, but the villain, that is, he has a power called Eye of the Cat. So that means he can see everything she can see. And he has telepathy so that he can communicate with her from afar. So he's using these powers and he's manipulating her and guiding her and stuff like that. And so, because of what she wants to do, they go back to this mansion that is in the Middle East. And we find out that this is where he lived after 9/11, because we did our 9/11 adventure, and I guess maybe I should have explained that. But we ripped off Watchmen. And in the original Watchmen comics, the idea is that the President of the United States orders Dr. Manhattan to go to Vietnam, right? So we did the same thing after 9/11, where we thought that the Bush administration would order John Redbridge, who'd been doing stuff for the American government for forever, ever since there was an America, really, and that they would have sent him to the Middle East. And so he lived there for a little while. There were a bunch of other stuff happened, but it's not really relevant to this. But we never said where he lived. And so we said, this is where the Cave of Wonders is. It's where the cave is that contains all of these crystals on top of this mountaintop in just the absolute middle of nowhere. So we said that he built a mansion on top of this mountain, and it has like a helipad so you can reach it via helicopter, which is how they get there. You know, it's sort of the beginning of the actual adventure. And the mansion at the end of the day kind of serves the purpose of being like a plug for this cave, so that random people don't just stumble in there by accident, discover something like cosmic crystals associated with fire, and now they have nuclear level fire they can just go use on their enemies or whatever, right? So yeah, they're at the mansion, and like I said, this vampire is kind of communicating her with her and telling her to seduce him. And the thing is, the Cabal doesn't actually know, because they're not omniscient, right? They have remote sensing. They can detect certain things. It took them a while, but eventually they learned of the existence of the cave and the crystals, right? So this is a new discovery for them. Um, what they do not know is that this is actually a different John Redbridge, right? So she tries to seduce him, and like I said, the other John Redbridge, his whole dying thing was he wished he had been a better man. So this one is trying to be more of a gentleman, not so quick to jump into things, because a lot of that stuff had caused a lot of problems for him in the past, right? For the other one, I mean, the other John Redbridge. He had, on more than one occasion, painted himself into a corner because he got involved with somebody that he shouldn't have. So he's more hesitant now, and he's taking his time, thinking things through, so on and so forth. So instead of him taking her to bed that night, which is what the Cabal thought is how that was going to happen, um, there's a guest room that she's in. And if you have to imagine the mansion, by the way, we were kind of describing like Tony Stark's mansion from like the first Iron Man movie, basically. So everything's very high tech, it's very modern, so on and so forth. But so she has her own room and she wakes up in the night. Again, this is straight out of like a Dracula movie. And she goes down to where the crystals are. And the the Cabal are commanding her to sort of pick all of the crystals she can and absorb all of the energy from the crystals. Well, so something that was it's actually a continuity blunder on our part is, like I said, we killed John Redbridge. Now we have a new John Redbridge. We were using the character sheet of the old one from the end of his life, which actually makes no sense because we should have been using a character sheet for when he was an Eldar. It was created by the old ones and he was out in space fighting in the space war and blah, 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 blah. He should have had completely different stats than what we gave him. Because over time, because since he's the GMPC, I want him, like, if the players do something where it seems like they're going to destroy the game world, it is the job of John Redbridge to get things back on track and to right the ship and so on and so forth. So a bunch of times over the years in the game, we would do stuff like give him the Infinity Gauntlet so that he had enough power he could actually do that. Or we've messed around with the Source from DC Comics. And there's just all sorts of MacGuffins and stuff in comic books that we've used. And nothing ever really stays forever, though, right? Something always happens. He doesn't have any more, blah, blah, blah. But eventually, we had this idea that he gets so powerful. We use the stats of the Source from the DC Heroes role-playing game. And if you substitute your 50 APs of Omni Power for 50 APs of Split, then instead of all of your attributes being a 75, they become a 25. And then you have something like 0 APs of Omni Power now because it is being used to be a bunch of guys all at once. And then you get, I want to say, 25 APs of Precognition, which is, I think, the ability to see 4 hours in the future. And what is it? Then 50 APs of Recall. And we actually said that his recall is kind of like useless because he had been an immortal. He'd been alive for so long. All that recall would just be his normal memory at that age. You know what I mean? He's not memorizing anything new. It's, if anything, he still wouldn't remember his whole life because he was older than 50 APs of time. But you get the gist. So he splits out so that he can be multiple guys. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but one of them is it's way easier to run him in an adventure when he's weaker. Oh, by the way, and then he runs into Mr. Splits, who's half black and half white. He breaks him down again. So now all of his attributes are a 12. And that's usually where we have him at. So in the recent games where we were actually doing stuff with him, he was all 12s. Right. And so we were like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't line up with him being an Eldar. So we decided the best thing to do to explain it away was to say he owns this mansion. He has these crystals growing under the mansion, right, in the cave. And he can go down into the cave whenever he wants. And if they are quote unquote ripe, because we made a banana joke. We said if they're about the size of a banana, then they're ripe. And he breaks it off from the cave wall and he absorbs the power out of it, you know. And that's it. And so then there are some other crystals in here, but they're really small. They're not the size of a banana, right? So the quote unquote baby bananas is, I think, what we started referring to the little crystals as. He leaves them alone. He's going to let them grow for years until they're ready to be picked and so on and so forth. But now the explanation for, well, where did he get all that energy, all that power that then he used for doing his split thing that he does, now we'd explain it away. Access to the cave of crystals is how he did that. So then that also meant that this chick, Kari, when she goes in there, yes, she's picking crystals, but they're not um huge, so on and so forth. But remotely, the Cabal is telling her to pick the crystals and absorb the power out of them. But she's not substituting anything for Split, right? She's just one girl who is like really powerful now. And so when she goes down here and is doing this stuff, Redbridge becomes aware of it. He goes down to confront her and she starts to throw him around. And she's like just throwing him through walls in the mansion. That she is much stronger than he is because he's all 12s, right? So she's just slapping him around and he doesn't want to fight her back because, first of all, that's been a thing in our game for ages. Like we will ask players, and a lot of our players are female. I mean, for at least 10 years now, I feel like usually my players are like maybe 60% female and 40% male is usually about the ratio. Because my wife's friends come over and play and stuff like that. And like my friends have kind of moved away at this point. Um, so the point is, though, I'll ask the girls, so like you believe in equal rights, for instance, and they'll go, oh, yeah, of course. And I'd be like, so if we were to get in a fight, like I'm allowed to punch back, right? And they'll be like, no. I'm like, that doesn't sound super equal to me. You have a different definition of equality than I think I do. Um, but at any rate, you get. I'm trying to use humor, but hopefully you get where I'm going there. So he doesn't want to hit her back, right? Because that makes him look like a jerk. So she's just throwing around, and so he starts. Well, he gets her monologue. He's doing the best he can. He's just trying to survive this situation, and so she starts to reveal stuff, and we get into some ideas here about what is. We don't for sure know what's true at this point because the Cabal are liars for sure, right? But what she tells them is because it's been a big mystery, like why do these crystals even exist? Where do they get their power? What is even the deal with this mountain that's just in the absolute middle of nowhere? And so what the Cabal told her is that this is literally the mountain from, like, I don't know if you've ever seen an old Charlton Heston movie called The Ten Commandments, but the idea that we went with in the game, and a friendly reminder because I'm sure someone will, hit me with some hate mail in the comments section. But like the Spectre at DC Comics is literally called quote unquote God's Angel of Wrath. Right. And DC uses other words for God, like they'll call him the voice or they'll call him the presence or whatever. But I mean, but it's God, right? And then Marvel does the same thing. Whether it's in the Ghost Rider stuff or the One Above All. I've seen a meme floating around Facebook for years now about how the one above all is God in the Marvel universe and stuff like that. So God appears in both Marvel and DC Comics, right? So we felt like this was on brand for us to say, well, let me explain a thing real quick. So in GURPS Supers, they have this idea called power residue. And part of what that is about is like in the comics in the 90s, which is when GURP Supers was made, a lot of guys would have like eye beams. And so they'd shoot a laser or something out of their eyes. And then afterwards, like their eyes would be smoking, or sometimes there's that people call it the Kirby crackle. Like if the Silver Surfer shoots a laser, or not a laser, but a cosmic energy blast out of his hand. Afterwards, sometimes he'll like make a fist, and there's like this black and white, kind of bubbly, almost electrical kind of thing coming off of his hand, sort of like smoke. And like comic books are a visual language. So I've never seen anybody spend any great amount of time on this. But I feel like Lloyd Blankenship, who wrote GURP Supers, I think like he was trying to explain that. And so he was saying, for instance, if somebody shoots a thing with a laser, not only are their eyes maybe smoking afterwards, but let's say they shot a boulder and broke it into smaller stones or something. Those smaller stones might also have this kind of like red neon smoke coming off of them, right? So that's power residue. And sometimes it can be like we basically get into the ideas of like solid, liquid, and gas, right? So the smoke coming out of your eyes or whatever, that's the gas. The liquid manifestation of it would be sort of like ectoplasm. If it's like a haunting or it's some kind of supernatural entity or energy, I meant to say, then you might have ectoplasm slime left over somewhere at the scene afterwards. Like people that talk about UFO stuff often have ectoplasm left over. They call it star jelly. People argue, though, that that's an indicator that UFO stuff is not science based. It is actually like a supernatural thing, um, which is neither here nor there. But the point is, you're getting the idea. And then so the solid residue is crystals. And so we thought, man, that's kind of a cool idea, that the reason this site is growing these crystals at all is that this is literally where like God came down and was here. And so if you were to talk about, what would God's character sheet look like, it would just be like infinite omnipower, right? You omnipower colon like little infinity sign afterwards. And so it's like in a world where power residue is a thing, then yeah, it's a good fit that all these years later, there's still these crystals coming up out of these rocks. And even the fact that they were like every color of the rainbow. You get into the whole, if you look at the Noah's Ark story and the purpose of the rainbow in that story, it fits, right? It's still a good fit. And then the thing of the Cabal can't go here themselves, that makes sense. Because like if demons and vampires and stuff, they take damage from holy water in role-playing games, I mean. And they whatever, if you hold up a cross, they can't approach you and all that jazz. Then like this whole place would be like that for them, right? So I thought, yeah, that's like it's a really cool idea. And so that's why they send the girl. And it's not that she's evil, because if she was evil, she couldn't enter this place. She's under hypnosis, right? She's a thrall. So she goes in and she's absorbing all this power and she's knocking John Redbridge around like a rag doll, man. He has split too much. He's too weak. He can't deal with her. But he gets her talking and she's revealing all of this stuff. But then he's like, hold up, though. Why do they want you to have the power? And that gets her to kind of stop. Because he says to her, and this was something from the old game with Jay and Ryan, with Umbra and Pulsar that I was talking about earlier. And I sort of talked about this a little bit, but not too much. We found out that there were these quote unquote gods in that campaign who had powered up in a very similar way. And that one way you could get the power was by touching the crystal yourself and absorbing the energy out of the crystal, right? But something else that we set up was, for whatever reason, because I guess, the Highlander franchise was like a really big deal in the 90s. And me and all my friends liked Highlander. I was more into the first movie and kind of less into everything else. Jay was like really into Highlander, the series, the one with Duncan MacLeod. I was for sure like team Connor myself. But at any rate, we had decided it would be cool in this campaign for these cosmic beings to sort of like hunt each other down. And then when one character would kill another character, the winner sort of gets the quickening. And then the idea was whatever that person had on their character sheet, you could start getting their abilities, right? So John Redbridge knows this. This has been a thing in the game, it had been established 25 years ago. So he tells her, he's like, they can't come here themselves, but they want the power. The only way they can possibly get the power is if they kill you. And they might not be omnipotent or whatever, not that she is, because like I said, the crystals were not fully grown when she was picking them, right? So no, it might not, like one of these guys might be weaker than you. I'll put it that way. But it's not just one guy. It's a ton of guys. And they're already controlling you kind of via the mesmerism thing. So who knows if they can make you just, when you go to them, are you just going to end your own life? That kind of thing. And then that snaps her out of it. And then of course they're upset about that. And the thing is, like, especially if you read the old Dracula novel, Dracula can try again later, right? And he can try to re-exert his influence over a character like Mina Harker and make her his slave again, and stuff like that. So this is not over because the bad guys are still out there, and now they've been reintroduced as a modern problem. By the way, we also said that the place that they've been hiding, the reason that no superheroes have found them, because you think superheroes are always flying around the world at super speed with X-ray vision and just so on and so forth, right? So where on earth have these guys been? We said they were on the Cydonia region of Mars. And if you're familiar with that area, there's the famous face on Mars, which they say is kind of just a hill and it was an optical illusion or whatever. But in our game, it's like, no, we're going to say it's an actual, like, more like almost like an Easter Island kind of a thing, right? Like it's an actual face. Um, and then there are like pyramids and stuff like that there in our game. And this is all kind of based on, I mean, I don't know if you want to call them urban legends or what you want to call it. I guess the terminology doesn't matter, but you get the gist, right? We thought it was cool ideas that in our game we were making it the coolest version of that, you know? But yeah, we decided that was kind of like Cabal headquarters was this spot on Mars. So now the heroes know about that. They're going to have to go deal with the Cabal. The Cabal are for sure going to try to reacquire Kari. But yeah, that was that adventure. And I'm sorry it took so much explaining, but like I say, it's us taking a bunch of stuff from old adventures and then like putting it together and going, well, what can we make out of all this, you know? So that was that. But we enjoyed it. I hope that you enjoyed hearing about it. If so, as always, smash that like button. Check to make sure you're still subscribed because YouTube really does love to unsubscribe you and not tell you. And leave us a comment. Have you ever done anything with, say, the face on Mars? Or have you made knockoffs of the Infinity Gems? Or have you had a character like, say, Torch that gets a massive upgrade and becomes a character like Pulsar? Or maybe you were a fan of Transformers the movie and you want to talk about that. Any comment you leave helps the channel out, actually. It seems to get more eyes on the channel, the more interaction there is. So that's always good. We love seeing comments from you guys. But from all of us here at the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.